Voilà, je laisse l'introduire.
So, shall we kick off? Okay, welcome to all of you and also to those online. I think it's all set up, so it should be working. So, I'm Sylvain Perret from CIRAD and also director at Agrinatura, which organization is co-hosting this event with Agroecology Coalition. And Emile Frison will take over. We'll have a sort of a interesting exercise this afternoon between the two of us, trying to be as fluid as we can. So I will leave now to Emile, and we'll get back later.
Thank you. So I'm Emile Frison from the Agroecology Coalition. For those that are online, we have simultaneous interpretation, English and French. So you can choose the channel on the bottom of your screen. Most people should be used to that by now. I would like to first invite our first opening remarks by Helene Berton from Sustainable Agri-Food Systems and Fisheries Unit at DG INPA of the European Union. She will be talking and giving some introductory remarks for 5 minutes. So, Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emile. So it's an honor and a great pleasure to welcome you all today at this N4G side event on agroecology, food system and nutrition, organized by the Agroecology Coalition, Agrinatura, but also the French representation in Rome, Netherlands, and the EU. This gathering represents a unique opportunity to explore how we can address the critical challenges at the intersection of food production, nutrition, and sustainability, especially in regions where these issues are most pressing. The challenges facing our global food system are multifaceted and urgent. We live in a paradox where, despite the world produce enough food, malnutrition, hunger, and diet-related disease continue to prevail. These issues are further exacerbated by climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, creating a fertile ground for economic and social imbalances, conflict, and all of which deepen further the crisis of hunger and malnutrition. While we won't address the issue of conflict directly today, we will focus on the critical nexus between agriculture, ecology, and nutrition. For too long, these areas have been treated in isolation. So today, we aim to bridge this gap and explore how agroecological systems can provide nutritious, diverse, and sustainable diet, particularly in low and middle-income countries, while supporting biodiversity and protecting our planet. Let's look ahead. By 2050, we will need to produce 60% more food to feed the world population that will reach 9.3 billion people. Continuing with business as usual approach will place an unsustainable strain on our natural resources. Take water, for example. Agriculture currently accounts for 70% of global water use, and the global demand for water has surged by 600% over the past century. This demand will only continue to rise, while the number of people living under water scarcity will increase sharply. In parallel, we know that a diet rich in diverse nutrient-dense food is essential. In many areas of the world, monoculture farming, increased reliance on unhealthy processed food, and the erosion of local systems have contributed to a global nutrition crisis. This crisis undermines social and economic development, stunting cognitive growth, reduction of productivity, and perpetuating poverty. So today, let's focus on solutions that benefit both the planet and its people. Our agroecology works with nature, building resilient systems that respect ecological boundaries, promote biodiversity, and enhance soil health. It empowers local community, value traditional knowledge, and ensure equitable access to resources. Evidence shows that in low and middle income countries, practices like crop diversification, intercropping, and agroforestry improve household diet. But this is not only the effect. It also fosters social cohesion, generate income, and reduce the risk of disaster, such as drought, that is improve, for example, the soil water retention. Additionally, these practices help avoid the debt cycle often associated with a chemical-intensive agriculture. So there is a critical link between biodiversity, diversity of food produce, and nutrition. Equally important is the role of consumer playing in shaping healthy diets. To achieve this, we must empower informed choices by increasing awareness of the nutritional and environmental impact of the different food options. Beyond these issues, in low-income areas, equally critical, if not more so, are the question of accessibility and affordability of healthy, nutritious food. DG INPA recognizes the importance of both supply and demand in nutrition. It supports focuses on agroecology, improving food quality and empowering consumers. In many countries like Madagascar, Laos, Rwanda, and Senegal, the EU is investing in sustainable agroecological practices that not only improve diet, but also protect ecosystems. While these programs have gained momentum in the recent years, they are still often at a too small scale. Given the magnitude of the challenges we face, it's critical that we accelerate the efforts. Clearly, the agricultural model must change, and the consumption patterns have a critical role to play. So as we look ahead, I would like to turn to our esteemed panel to help us identify the most crucial level for this transformation. So I have 3 questions for you. The first one, who should lead this change? Is it government? Is it private sector? Is it communities? Is it someone else? And secondly, how we can mobilize the necessary investment to support this shift, while we know we have to make some long-term sustainable change that needs some investment, and at the same time, response to urgent challenges like food insecurity, water scarcity, and the different damage of climate change. And finally, why, despite our effort, we are still struggling so much to integrate nutrition outcome into the agenda of sustainable agriculture, food system, and agri-value chains. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helene, for these opening remarks. As already been mentioned, I think that our current food systems are not delivering what they should. They are responsible for biodiversity loss, for climate change. They are not able to tackle also the triple burden of malnutrition. We know that malnutrition has been worsening since 2015 instead of improving. And the burden of obesity and non-communicable diseases is bringing a very big burden for society. But evidence is there that we have solutions that can address both the economic, environmental, nutrition, health, and social equity agendas. But this will require a redesign and a more fundamental rethinking of our food systems. It's not just about adapting a few new practices on the ground. It's really about a different paradigm, and that requires, as I said, a very deep rethinking. But evidence is building, and a literature review of the last 20 years has shown that agroecological approaches can really deliver both on food security and nutrition, while also addressing the other objectives. In addition to that, the application of the tool for agroecology performance evaluation that was developed by FAO and that has now been applied in more than 20 countries, shows real direct linkages and where improved or more deep agroecological transformations are associated with increased productivity, increased income, increased dietary diversity, and increased and improved food security. So we have evidence now on what can be done to tackle these different challenges. But as I said, this requires some more fundamental changes. Countries have been recognizing more the need to bring these things together in the context of the COP16 on biodiversity. The Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health is one step at least in that direction, but also recognizing the role of consumers and what needs to change at the consumption side has also been taken into consideration, for example, in the State of World and Agriculture 2024 report. So this hybrid side event will be exploring this nutrition-sensitive actions, but more broadly, the transformation of our food systems, both production and consumption, with demand-side interventions to bridge the gap between production and consumption, meet the dietary needs, and aiming to tackle all forms of malnutrition. The key topics that we will be hearing about is about consumer education, policy, pricing, and market-based solutions to improve access to agroecological food and healthy food, and supporting and that are also supporting and empowering vulnerable groups, and also particularly women that play, of course, a central role in food systems. And a voice will be given in the discussions to different system transformation actors with food producers and policymakers. So let me now introduce the both keynote speakers and panelists. We will start with Dr. Rachel Bezner Kerr, Professor of Global Development at Cornell University. Following that, we will hear from Gabriela Albuquerque from the University of Lisbon. And after these two keynote speeches, we will have the inputs from four panelists. First, Stineke Oenema from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Followed by Angela Odero from Kenya, from the RioFish enterprise in Kenya, and then from Helena Guarin or Helene Berton, depending if Helena arrives in time. She's stuck in traffic, I understand. And the last speakers will be Francine, Xavier, and Fabricio Muriana from Comeda de Amanya Institute in Brazil. That will be by video conference. So let me now turn to Dr. Rachel Bezner Kerr.
Thanks very much. Maybe I'll stand, I don't know, over here. Is this okay? Thanks very much, Emile, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm really honored to be here. And could I have the first slide? I have on the first slide a photograph of a woman who's smiling very broadly. She's pointing behind her, and it's a woman that I've worked with, a farmer in Malawi. She's pointing in part to the healthy-looking, diverse field. It's maize intercropped with beans, and she used organic manure and compost to improve, and legume intercrops to get a healthy-looking crop behind her. But she's also pointing to her husband, who's holding the baby. And I wanted to start that as my opening slide, because agroecology is more than, next slide, sorry, there we go, nope. Agroecology is more than a set of ecological principles to apply to the food system. It is also social, political, and economic principles, including attention to social justice and questions of equity. And apparently we won't be able to see the slides. Maybe my government no, I better not make a joke about that. We're facing technical problems. So there are 13 principles that we identified as part of the high-level panel of experts in relation to agroecology. And some of them are familiar to folks who are doing ecological approaches to agriculture, things like recycling of nutrients and energy, enhancing biodiversity in the farming system, reducing the use of toxic inputs, and ensuring there's synergies between different parts of the system. But as you look at the other principles, if you were permitted to, you would see beyond the farm and field, there are principles related to connecting producers and consumers, addressing fairness in the food system, ensuring that cultural values are respected in the kinds of foods that are produced, and knowledge co-creation. So producers and consumers are doing science with scientists to find the right solutions that are adapted to their local agro-ecosystem. And we've done, okay, there we go. So you get a picture there. And a number of these principles are directly or indirectly linked to nutrition. And we looked at the different ways, the different potential pathways that agroecology can improve nutrition. And this is a paper I did with a PhD student and Carolina Botello from the FAO, where we looked at the most obvious one that people think about is increasing biodiversity. So there's more diversity of foods that people can consume. But there's also, if you improve the fairness in the system for producers and for farm workers and for regional food businesses, then that increased income can lead to a greater amount of healthy foods purchased by those folks. Social empowerment is another mechanism. If there's greater sharing of healthy foods within households and with communities and between communities, that can lead to improvements in nutrition. There's also knowledge capacity building about strategies for child care, child feeding practices, different ways that can enhance nutritional outcomes. And attention to cultural ideas about food and respecting cultural features of food systems is another mechanism that can lead to improvements in nutrition, as well as things like public procurement that procures healthy, nutritious, nutrient-dense foods and makes it accessible for low-income households. So there's a number of mechanisms or pathways by which agroecology can improve nutrition. We know, and Emile hinted at this, that very little of the current research and investment and development activities goes towards agroecological approaches. This study from a few years ago estimates about 2.7% goes towards programs partially supportive of agroecology. So the vast majority of money is going towards kind of business as usual approach to nutrition, which tends to focus on single crops, biofortification, and sort of food production focus rather than looking at the system as a whole. So Emile mentioned this study that we did as part of the high-level panel of experts, and we looked at the evidence over 20 years for whether agroecology could improve food security and nutrition. And after screening over 11,000 papers, we identified 56 that actually measured agroecological practices and measured food security and/or nutrition outcomes, and were in peer-reviewed literature using a rigorous scientific design. And 78% of those found evidence of positive impacts on food security and nutrition. Only one study found negative impacts from agroecological practices. Some found neutral or a mix of positive and neutral impacts. And the more complex the agroecological system was, the more likely it was to have positive impacts on food security and nutrition. So I'm going to walk you through some examples of what that looks like. What did these studies entail? Just to give you a concrete picture of how agroecological approaches can improve food security and nutrition, focusing on nutrition, although our review was food security and nutrition. And I'm going to start with 2 studies that came out of some of my research that I've co-led with colleagues in other institutions in Malawi and Tanzania, where we did both pre-post design and control versus intervention design with a range of farmers. In Tanzania, we worked with almost 600 farming households using a randomized control design. So half of those households were assigned the intervention and half not, and we measured over time. And in Malawi, we worked with about 6,000 farming households. And the farmers were allowed to choose what they wanted to experiment with. That's part of an agroecological approach. And we also integrated community-based education around nutrition and around gender. So it wasn't just practices in the field. And in all the studies, we found a significant improvement in food security and dietary diversity, and controlling for other factors that affect those impacts. So for example, in Malawi, we found women's dietary diversity was significantly better compared to control households and compared to the start of the intervention. And in Tanzania, we found that children were 1.48 times more likely to have diverse diets if they were in the agroecology intervention compared to those who were not. And just to note that, importantly, gender was a significant factor in these interventions. So for example, women who discussed, or farmers who discussed farming with their spouse were 2.4 times more likely to be food secure and have diverse diets. And in Tanzania, we found a significant decrease in women having probable depression that was significantly associated both with improvements in food security and with improvements in men helping out with household tasks. Moving to a different study, in Ecuador, there was an examination of agroecological, and none of the other studies I'm involved with, just to be clear. In Ecuador, they compared agroecological farmers to their neighbors, and they found that the agroecological farmers had both higher diverse diets or dietary diversity and lower consumption of highly processed foods. In Guatemala, there was a study working with indigenous farmers where they found, comparing conventional farmers to indigenous farmers, that indigenous farmers using these agroecological practices had higher incomes, higher food security, and more diverse diets compared to farmers who were using the conventional practices. And in this study, they used mixed methods, and in the qualitative research, they found that the farmers talked about the significance of indigenous values and association with indigenous organizations as an important feature of using these agroecological practices. So this kind of cultural foodways dimension and cultural values was an important part of why they were using the practices. And there are very few studies in the urban context, but there was a study done in Ecuador. It was a cross-sectional study with almost 3,000 households, or 3,000 consumers, comparing consumers who purchased agroecological foods and consumers who purchased conventional foods in 3 different cities. And they found, that the agroecological consumers were more likely to consume an adequate number of fruits and vegetables and a lower amount of foods high in salt, and they were also more likely to read nutrition labels. In in-depth interviews as a follow-up to the structured surveys, the motivations for consumers to buy agroecological foods included an interest in health, concern about food safety or quality, specifically reduced exposure to toxic pesticides, and having solidarity with farmers who are using these practices. So these were some of the main motivations. And then a case study in Nepal worked with women's groups who did a combination of practices, including integrating livestock and the use of animal manure, and reforestation and compost use. And they found that children's diets from the women's groups who were participating in the intervention significantly improved compared to those who did not. This was another delayed intervention study. And they found greater impacts in the poorer regions. So in the regions where there were sort of greater poverty and marginalization, the impacts on children's diets was found to be greater, including an increase in the consumption of animal source foods. So I don't know who is my timekeeper, okay, that's excellent. I just briefly want to talk about a study that we recently finished in collaboration with colleagues at CIRAD and at l'ARTES. And this was an exploratory study looking at the potential for agroecology to improve urban low-income households' nutrition. And we used Senegal as a case study. And we did both quantitative surveys with consumers and interviews with consumers and interviews with market vendors who were selling agroecological products. And we found that these small markets relied on frequent social interactions with their clientele to build trust. There wasn't a formal labeling or certification system. It was really frequent interaction that developed this trust with their clientele. And they actually worked to keep prices low and affordable for low-income households and saw that as part of their role in these markets. And the women who bought and I should say we only interviewed women consumers. We were focused on women's nutrition in this study. And the women who bought from these agroecological markets, the reasons that they prioritized were, again, health, taste, and low exposure to pesticides as the main reasons that they wanted to purchase agroecological foods. They purchased them frequently when they were available, almost daily for most of their fruits and vegetables, but it was more difficult for the vendors to provide adequate supply during the rainy season. And so we've identified some of the barriers to increase access to agroecological foods in this context in a low-income country has to do with increasing the availability of small vendors across the city that are close to low-income neighborhoods and helping with some of the technical issues around providing available vegetables during the rainy season, as well as public procurement programs that could make it move some of these products into things like schools and clinics. And thank you. I think that's where I end because I see so I'm standing. And so just to conclude, there is robust evidence that agroecology can improve nutrition. Most of the evidence is in the rural context. There is limited evidence in the urban context, and there's also limited evidence with regards to non-communicable diseases. We also know that there's very little research or investment in these approaches, and so there's lots of room and potential for further enhancement of these approaches.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. Don't go too far because I'm sure part of the panelist discussion you will be also questioned onto some follow-ups. I'd like to give the floor to Gabriela, who's setting up a slideshow. It will be a complementary contribution to exactly what we heard from Rachel. Demand, supply side, how agroecology contributes to some changes in the food system and then nutrition. And then Gabriela will tell us stories about more the demand kind of leverage that can play also a role into change. You force me to manage time. It's not fair, Gabriela. It's almost ready. She's coming. She's coming. Still technical problems. In the meantime, I can say that we have a unique opportunity to speak about science policy interfacing. That is the SPI of this project. So please feel free to prepare your questions because we have some policymakers, decision makers, people in the realm of policy forge here in this room with Helene, but probably some others as well, maybe online. So please, between scientists and policymakers, please don't feel free to really ask the right questions. Gabriela, still struggling or is it? Okay.
Thank you. So I will take the floor. I think we are still facing some technical problems. Let me just... Okay, now I think it's working. Thank you, Sylvain, for introducing me and the topic. I think there is not much that I can add now about what I'm going to talk about. And I think most of you have already touched upon different topics that that I prepared to bring here today. So it's good that we started to discuss them. The fact that the double burden of malnutrition is increasing worldwide, the fact that we are facing different patterns in terms of the distribution of this burden. We see, for example, in these bluish gray areas, countries, regions where the double burden of malnutrition is mostly due to increasing overweight and obesity, while we see at the same time other areas of the globe, for example, in dark gray, where undernutrition is still very much prevalent, and food insecurity. And for instance, in the same continent, if we look, for example, to sub-Saharan Africa, we see these patterns coexisting with some forms of overnutrition. So this creates additional challenges in how to tackle the double burden of malnutrition. At the same time that we also know that we are facing challenges in food systems that are not sustainable, that are not producing healthy diets. Okay, so in parallel to these changes that have been occurring in the patterns of the double burden of malnutrition, we also see a phenomenon which is the nutrition transition that has been occurring globally, and that illustrates some changes in the dietary patterns. This represents some changes from the 1960s to the current era, let's say, where we see an increase globally in the consumption of fats and oils and sugary drinks, sugary foods. At the same time that we see, for example, the contribution of fruits, vegetables, and of other very nutrient-rich foods are not increasing at the same pace. So. If we look at differences at regional level, we can see that there are some differences here in food supply. So, especially when comparing regions of higher and lower development, we can see, for example, in Asia and Africa, the highest contribution of staple foods to the diet of these populations. We see that fruits and vegetables, we see that pulses do not contribute much to the dietary patterns of these populations, and how this is linked to a low dietary diversity, which has also been focused here today. So these are some changes in dietary patterns overall that show some changes in the demand. We see at the same time, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, a higher demand for more convenience foods, with people having to work longer, how can I say this word? It's escaping. With women entering the workforce, we see that there is less available time to cook at home, so people are more dependent on ultra-processed foods and these foods that are easier to cook at home, for example. And we see this has been driven by some changes in income growth. So my point here is to say that although we see that income growth provides some more options in terms of purchasing foods, sometimes these are not the most healthier ones. And here we see some ties to food demand. What I would like to highlight as well is that there are many other challenges that food systems are facing and that are also influencing food demand. Sorry. Okay, now it's working, so it's easier. So we have seen how income and purchasing power can influence food demand. And at the same time, we see, for example, that a huge part of the population is facing conflicts and crises, and how food is limited in this context. So food demand is also limited. We also see at the same time how a huge part of the nutrient rich that our food systems produce, such as fruits, vegetables, fish, for example, how there is a huge food loss. So these foods are produced but are not reaching the consumers. And at the same time, we know that food awareness, literacy, cultural norms, and the food environment are factors that deeply influence food demand. And this is also something that has come up in the previous session. We see that there are many power imbalances, many inequalities in food systems, even sometimes across different stakeholders that have influence in the foods that are available to the consumers, and this also affects food demand. So just before ending, I would like to say that we know that the consumers have the power through their food choices to influence food demand. However, we tend to each time hear more and more this expression, consumer agency. So the ability to make informed, autonomous decisions, which are supported by an enabling environment. And we also know that consumers in the food system, they do not act alone. So this consumer agency is important to take into account. So having all the stakeholders of the food system acting together in solidarity to make sure that the food demand, so that the foods demanded are health and sustainable, that they are also affordable, accessible, and desirable. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. So we will hear now from the different panelists, but before that, I was asked to say 2 words about the Agroecology Coalition. This was set up in 2021 on the occasion of the Food System Summit, and it's a coalition of the willing to engage in food system transformation through agroecology. It's today bringing together more than 330 members, of which 51 countries, 3 regional commissions, 2 subnational governments, and more than 280 organizations, including UN organizations, civil society organizations, researchers, indigenous people organizations, farmer organizations, philanthropic foundations. So if you want more information about the coalition, look at our website. So I don't want to take more time here, but I will now introduce the first panelist, Stineke Oenema from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and she will tell us more about what's happening in the Netherlands, how you are bringing in some of these approaches in your policy, and how this is really contributing to improve nutrition.
Thank you, Emile. And thank you, and good morning, good day to all of you, and thank you for the invitation. I also like to thank Helene, because you, and I promise you, we did not coordinate preparing our small talks, but you used the word struggle a lot. And I'm also going to use that word a lot. So just to frame my, my little contribution a bit. So people who know me or people who know where I worked before will understand that I do not really like boxes. And if there are boxes, I like to connect them. I used to work with UN Nutrition, and the objective of UN Nutrition was to bring UN agencies together across the various topics they are working on in order to improve nutrition. You cannot do that alone. You need various disciplines to do that. So I left UN Nutrition, and correctly, I'm now working with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is a completely different cup of tea. But I'm still connecting the dots. I'm still reaching out to other ministries. I'm reaching out to the Ministry of Health. I'm reaching out to the Ministry of Agriculture, and I try to make it happen. One of my assignments is basically to make sure that we work coherently across the ministries and within the ministries in the several departments in order to improve food security. And that's a struggle. Especially it's a struggle nowadays. You asked me to explain a little bit of where we are coming from in the Netherlands these days. Well, it's not so easy. The severe budget cuts, and not only in the Netherlands, all over Europe, USA as well. So it's not easy if you work in overseas development aid. Maybe it's lucky that in the Netherlands, food security is one of the priority topics. So despite budget cuts, there's still some increased funds available for food security and nutrition. So that's a little bit of a background. I am a nutritionist. I'm passionate about nutrition, but I'm not going to say many things about nutrition because I spoke with my colleagues. And when I spoke with my colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we work on food security through sustainable farming systems. The colleague who is in charge of sustainable farming systems told me, no, we don't follow agroecology in order to improve food security. We are so-called agnostic. So our objective it's sustainable farming systems. So yes, we work sustainably. We like to promote sustainable agriculture practices, but we are focused on demand-driven interventions, context-specific, and it should improve food security. And yes, that can be agroecological. And when I was listening to the introduction, there's indeed many areas that we adhere to, like soil fertility. We are very active on, but also the social aspects. Of course, we work a lot with the smallholder farmers. Those are the people that suffer most from food insecurity. So therefore, you have to work on those target groups. But we do not claim we work according to agroecological principles, despite the fact that we apply many of the principles regardless. So what do we do in the sustainable farming system work? A lot on land rights. If you have secure land rights, you are more willing to invest in soil quality and sustainable practices. Soil health, soil fertility management, that's something we do. Seed management, improved seeds that are both drought resistant, but also contribute to more availability of vegetables. What does that have to do with nutrition? Okay, I'll say a few things about nutrition, and there is also where the struggle starts. With these sustainable farming systems, when I came in the ministry like a year ago, so I started reading, and I thought, okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, but it's not yet getting there. But when I started reading travel reports of colleagues who went to like Kenya or Uganda, then you see that actually the impact on the ground is interesting. You see the improved production and then also improve diversity. But it takes time. It's not that immediately people start to diversify their production. It takes time. Maybe we can do better. Maybe we can do it quicker. But it's interesting to see that you know, small by small incremental steps, you start improving even biodiversity, which can lead to better nutrition. It's just that we didn't measure it. So that's another struggle. Then another part of where we work is on improved marketing of healthier products. But that's separate from the sustainable farming systems. And that's a pity as well, isn't it? Because it's kind of, we are getting there, we are connecting the dots, but not from the start. Which brings me to the other ministry where I collected input from the Ministry of Health. And that's an interesting one because they made, in the Netherlands, I'm now speaking of the Netherlands, not about ODA, they made the connection between production, food environment, and demand. So the objective is health, improved health, obviously, and they focused on employees, and they focused on canteens. So by improving the food availability, healthy food availability in canteens, they try to improve the health of people, but also make it more attractive and also making the healthy choice the more sustainable choice. So in the Netherlands, we have this wheel of 5, where you can pick and choose your healthy product from. And within the wheel of 5, they started to swap products from more unsustainable to more sustainable. So again, these small steps really help. Moving quickly then to the Ministry of Agriculture. They are also struggling. You may have heard about the struggles in the Netherlands with the high nitrogen levels in the Netherlands that kind of blocks the entire society. But in the meantime, there's also groups of people that now realize that there is a nexus approach very badly needed. So that connects soil with water and even with One Health. And that is a slow process, but that seems to land. The Ministry of Agriculture also brings this agriculture, let's say, products or systematics to other countries, but does not focus on the small-scale producers. So that's, I'm not sure if that helps food security and nutrition. What does help, though, is another struggle in the Ministry of Agriculture, where people try to include sustainability criteria in the codex discussions. And that's interesting, and it's a real struggle, because codex is all about food safety. But now there is a tendency with a few partners to bring in the sustainability criteria so that you can, yes, improving food security, but also improve the sustainability aspects. I have one, yeah, I'm now finishing off. So, summing up, I was saying some things about small steps. I think in the implementation, that's what we really try. We take these small steps, try to combine the dots, to connect the dots, but taking small steps in the right direction. In addition, and that also came out of the session beforehand, we need to work on the enabling environment in order to scale up. And that's where we need to work on the Food System Summit, make sure there is an impact on sustainability and nutrition, work in the COPs, the biodiversity COP, the climate COP, but also the Codex Alimentarius to keep pushing to connect the dots, to make this sustainability effort work and to make those health outcomes come out for sure. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stineke. Just to remind the panelists that they should factor in their contribution. I forget to say that for Stineke, but the key question asked by Helene Berton, which was about what would be the most relevant level to leverage change in those food systems towards improved nutrition, and also more thematically speaking, what would be the priorities to put forth. So this, well, you mentioned more sort of a relevant approach with your step-by-step description of what could be the right way of proceeding, which is another way to addressing the question. I'd like to turn to Angela Odero from Kenya and the role of an SME, RioFish, on to what we're talking about today. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. So RioFish, we're a private limited company, and we are women-owned in an industry which is male-dominated in Kenya. We're in the fish value chain. So we position ourselves as aggregators mainly, but we also have a fish farm. And our main focus is the rural fishing communities around Lake Victoria, who are plagued with the scarcity of fish now because wild catch is dwindling significantly. So we realized that the women and the youth were significantly underserved. mainly because if you look at the options to fishing, you'd see things like aquaculture, which are very capital intensive. So the women and the youth do not have access to that, to capital very easily. And then also you find that it is easier for the men to be able to get financing. But now the women are the ones who go for the fish because they're the ones who sell the fish or feed their families. And the youth sometimes are also in that space where they need to be able to provide for the families, the ones they come from or the ones they make. So we decided to focus on these two groups to be able to empower them. And so what we did is we set up a fish farm so that we are farmers ourselves first. And then to be able to recruit these youth and women to get into fish farming, we understand what fish farming entails, not just by reading, but by actually doing it. And then we bring them on board, help them to access inputs, train them, and then market being a very big problem for smallholder fish farmers who will struggle to access cold chain. The market system in Kenya market system is quite fragmented. So you find that smallholder farmers not really have that ease of access to the market. So when you provide cold chain and you're able to provide market by buying all that fish from them, then you reduce the food loss and waste that they'll encounter when they can't get the fish to the market on time. And also you economically empower them. So that way you have better nutrition and economic outcomes for these groups. And then some of the barriers that we face with the Kenyan community when it comes to eating fish is things like affordability. Fish is not a very cheap protein source in Kenya because the cost of production is quite high, and then availability. Because of the dwindling wild stocks and then the seasonal nature of fish supply, then fish becomes very difficult to access all year round. And when you do get it, it's also quite expensive. And then the cultural nuances around fish, you find that communities tend to eat what they predominantly eat from before. So convincing some of these people to change from eating, for example, meat to now incorporating fish in their diet has not been a very easy thing. And then there's the issue of exposure, knowledge. A lot of people do not appreciate the nutritional value of fish. So if that is not tackled, then it becomes very difficult to even convince them to eat fish. Then there's the economic vulnerability. Women are the ones who generally sell the fish in the markets, and they're usually restricted to the low-value fish species. But now what happens is because traditionally men are the ones who are out there fishing, then they exploit these women, in ways including sexually, so they can be able to access the fish that they can sell. So those are some of the barriers. So some of the women who are not willing to go down that route, probably cannot be able to access the fish. And then for RioFish, now how we bridge the gap between farmers, especially smallholder farmers, and the urban markets. So let's start with the fact that these farmers do not have access to the cold chain. So we aggregate the fish, and for that fish to be aggregatable, it needs to be of a certain quality. So we invest a lot in training the farmers on sustainable fish farming, on how to handle the fish correctly at harvest, when to harvest, and even, site selection if you're doing cage farming or pond farming, just basically, proper practices so that by the time your fish is ready, it did not cost you excessive amounts of money, and it is fish that can actually go to the market. Because some of the problems we face is that the farmer calls you, tells you they have ready fish, and it's fish that you really cannot buy. It's either the wrong size, the quality is just off. So, and to that end also, that as we sell the fish as RioFish, no one knows that it's fish from another farmer. So we have our own fish, we have the fish we're buying from these different farmers. So we also, that quality aspect. And then at the end of the day, we're also trying to make money. So that fish has to be fish that we buy and we can be able to sell on to the market. And then the other thing is that a lot of most people in Kenya would eat tilapia and maybe Nile perch. Nile perch has not been grown commercially successfully to the best of my knowledge. Tilapia is widely available. It's a widely farmed fish. A few people are farming catfish. But then now you find that catfish does not sell very well. So what we have done as RioFish is to incorporate innovative solutions for that. So we are coming up with value-added products for the catfish so that we can be able to buy the catfish from the fish farmers. And then the other thing we do is advocacy. You find that unfortunately, some of the policies which have been enacted in our government are not very conducive to fish farmers. So they make it either very expensive. So some things like at some point we were paying taxes on feeds. I know fish feed being 70% of your production cost. When that, the tax is imposed on that, you're not going to sell fish with tax. So it makes your fish very expensive. And there's nothing you can do because to buy that feed, you have to pay the tax. So we do a lot of lobbying on the government so that we can reduce taxes. Recently, we had a new tax introduced in December of last year, a 5% tax on all the landed fishes in addition to all the taxes that we have. So we successfully, with other industry players, lobbied the government to take off that tax. So what we're just trying to, look for is ways that the government can make fish production affordable, cost-effective and affordable, so that we're not relying on imports of fish. And then the other thing we have also found is that fish waste, especially from tilapia, can be used to produce biogas. So this biogas we are using now for things like cooking at our aggregation facility. And the idea is to be able to scale this and be able to have the women at the markets, collect their fish gut at a certain point, and then it can be turned to gas, which hopefully can be sold back to them for frying their fish, moving them away from things like using charcoal, which is very unhealthy and it's also not good for the environment. So that's something we are working on. And these are things we don't do on our own. So we have partners. We're not in the energy space, but we are always open to partnerships where we can be able to sell more fish and also, better our women. Because at the end of the day, the whole idea of getting into fish farming was not for us to just make money. But for me, it was more of a motivation to save women from exploitation and also economically empower them.
Thank you very much, Angela. And this is nice to hear from a very practical example on what can be done towards improving nutrition based on fish. I will now invite the participation through the virtual connection with Francine and Fabricio from Comeda de Amanho Institute in Brazil. They will tell us about their activities regarding the transition towards healthy, sustainable, inclusive, and empowering, biodiverse, and culturally integrated food system. It's a mouthful, but I think that is telling you the different dimensions that we should be taking into consideration when we think about improving nutrition. So also we'll hear about what Brazil's efforts are in order to offer sustainable food at COP30. So I hand over now to Francine.
Hi, thank you, Emile. Thank you for the invitation.
We don't, yeah, can you, yeah.
Did you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here. Our work at Comeda do Amanhã Institute focus on 3 strategic teams, interconnected areas that serve to organize the most pressing food system challenges: food and cities, food and climate, and food and culture. Nowadays, we work mainly on the urban food agenda, the urban food systems, with programs, intelligence, and advocacy towards better food policies and growing food system movement. Our key program is the LUPA, the Brazilian Laboratory on Urban Food Policies, launched in 2021. LUPA is both a capacity building and a knowledge sharing program, and a platform for information and best practice on local food policies. It supports policy innovation, facilitates peer-to-peer cooperation and mutual learning, highlights common bottlenecks, and supports advocacy at the national level. Supports and facilitates the development of local policies with a circular food system approach and a local multi-year food strategy within a participatory governance mechanism. Because we believe that the policies planned with coherence, social participation, and a systemic vision of food, focusing on territorial dynamics and the right to food, led to effective, durable, legitimate, and therefore efficient results. LUPA has been structured as a community of cities. Nowadays, it comprises 450 participants from 54 Brazilian cities in 18 states of Brazil. LUPA has been recognized as a relevant and innovative program by SOFI and IPAS Food in 2023, and by the high-level panel of experts in 2024. And aware of the potency of Brazilian civil society, in 2023, Comida da Manhã launched the Café com Comida. It's a space where civil society, represented by institutes, universities, and collectives, can converge on issues, debate common challenges, and seek possible paths so that our utopia of healthy and sustainable food systems can become increasingly a collective project. Co-coordinate with the Institute, with Regenera Institute. Currently, more than 40 organizations or collectives participate, working in any area of the food systems at local, regional, and national levels. In those 2 years.
The line is unstable.
My line?
Yes, you're interrupted. So maybe turn off your camera so that we have a better use of bandwidth. Okay.
So should I?
Please continue.
Okay. In these 2 years of cooperation, we have prepared an in-depth mapping of the network of relationship between Café com Comida organizations and their interests on advocacy and action on food and climate agenda, and develop strategies for the collaborative construction of collective actions. Since 2024, we have joined collaborative actions for advocacy at COP30 in Belém, and develop strategies to expand the public debate on the relationship between agri-food systems, climate, and planetary health, with the construction of proposals for solutions for the Global South. In 2025, our work focused in line with the opportunity of holding COP30 in Belém do Pará. And now, I'll let Fabricio from Regenera Institute explain it better for you. Fabricio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francine. I hope you can also listen and see, but if you can, just let me know. Emile, I'm listening to you quite well. I believe we now have a stable connection. I start by saying that we are going to have a COP in Brazil, and Brazil is a food-producing country. So that means we will have a much stronger civil society participation as a whole. So that's the reason why we are organizing more than 40 institutions that are not only non-profit, but they name themselves as food systems institutions in here. And we also have several places where we vocalize new agendas. So that's the path we are bringing when we are talking about food inside COP. COP30 Food Initiative is both connected to all of the civil society activity, but also with the production area in the biome of the Amazon. From our side, in Instituto Regenera, we have been working since 2020 with the production, specifically groups in agroecology production there in Belém. We are trying our best to open more markets so that they have a commitment to any type of production they do. And the effort right now is to have such a commitment from COP30 organization, which is decided mainly in Brasilia, in the federal government. So we have been working since 2023 as farmers noticed that the Amazon Summit, with all the 9 presidencies, had invited them to make a small fair inside the event, but they did not invite them to make the catering, which is something that seemed obvious for them when they were inside there. So from that moment on, we started working on a panel that happened in COP28, demanding low carbon food. Through all 2024, we have been understanding how are we going to apply the COP catering service in COP30 together with 3 ministries and trying to align all the production that is available in the biome, which seems reasonable to be there because we have a very centralized production here in Brazil. So food comes from very far away. And the effort now is to convince for a larger ambition on how much food are we bringing from these agroecological producers. We are talking about original populations, traditional populations here in Brazil, and we are talking about all of the agenda of social biodiversity, which I'm not going to open directly in here because we don't have that much time. But I invite everyone in the room to be in touch with the COP30 Food Initiative, either by Instituto Comida do Amanhã or Instituto Regenera, and anyone willing to open this discussion through food, that's our aim in the event. I see that my time is over in here, so I'm bringing the word back to you there. And thank you so much for this invitation. It's very important for us.
Thank you very much, Fabricio and Francine. Sorry for the slight problem, but we could hear what you would say, so it was perfect. Thank you very much. I would now turn to Helene and Helena, who could join us, Helena Guarin, so that we can sort of reflect. You can reflect on what you heard from were there any responses to what you were looking for in terms of the relevant levels or priorities that could help speed up the change into these food systems? And then we'll open the floor for more questions from the audience and from the distant auditors. But please, Helene, Helena, if you have anything you want to share from what you heard or any other ideas, it's your time. And I owe you a microphone.
Okay, thank you. And very interesting discussions and also very practical point of view also from the countries and from producers. So what I could hear that it's very important to have really these integrated approaches and to recognize that we have to work on both supply and demand side of integrating nutrition and agroecology. I may recall maybe some other evidence that was already shared at the international level, not only at, let's say, the COPs of climate change, but also COPs of biodiversity. And in particular, COP16, Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, that is actually bringing the link between the health, nutrition, that to have healthy people, we need a healthy planet. And how safeguarding biodiversity can also improve diets of local population. So on one side, it's important to continue to diversify production systems, to have these integrated farming practices and to enhance offer of diverse and healthy diets. But we also need consumers. It was very well explained also by Miss Angela that people need to be demanding healthy food. And in the last years, we have seen in many low and middle income countries increased consumption of unhealthy food, highly processed food that are easy to eat because people have less, they have a very high workload and less time to maybe prepare their food. So maybe here also the governments and international organizations can help in creating more healthy food environments that are promoting access to more diverse and healthy products. And I would like to mention that with other donors and we have been working with International Development Law Organization and WHO on creating these healthy food environments, especially through regulatory and fiscal frameworks. For example, an example in a country like Mexico with very high increase of obesity, the water was more expensive than sweetened beverages. So to tax unhealthy food and to promote and maybe to reduce tax for healthy local production, also promoting this localization of food production and increasing also the food sovereignty in the countries. I think I will stop here and pass.
Thank you. I will come back to the word of struggle because the challenges are so huge. We have seen such great example, but again, at a small scale. So to fight such a big issues, we'll need an army of fighters, an army of agronomists, of consumers, ready to eat better food, be aware of the impact on the environment, what they consume. And for having a young adult and adolescent at home, I can tell you it's far from their preoccupation. They absolutely don't care about all of that. And this morning there was in the civil society pavilion, there was the youth organization. And it's really, we are almost too old in this room. You know, we need an army of young people ready for the fight and well-trained. I know the agronomists, for example, are rarely trained in nutrition. Myself, I didn't get that in my curricula, and I know it's still not the case. The European Commission has worked in Chad, notably on for Manut to train agronomists, but also civil engineers looking after water or health people. We really need to have all young people really aware of the challenge and the possible solutions to get a critical mass of actors that are ready to step up and implement all the good solutions we have been looking all around the world.
Thank you, Helene. Now we'll open up the floor to questions, either from the room and also from our distant auditors. So please don't hesitate, use the chat that we can see from here to maybe pose your questions. From the room, any comment, questions? This also would concern Rachel for her initial contribution to this session. Well, I can maybe kick off with asking Rachel, by the way. That was part of the comment I made in between your two presentations. Somehow we can intuitively understand that there's a link between a producer, a farmer producing food in a certain more natural way, and then benefiting from that food, hence improve nutrition. What about considering the demography, especially for Africa, where urbanization is now massive? So did you also include into your analysis, you touched that a bit on another continent actually, but for Africa, or what are your considerations about that point of this distance that is growing between production sites and the final consumers, making this link that you very well established and proved between agroecology and nutrition a bit more distant and difficult to get actually?
Thanks for the question. I think there's a couple of different ways to tackle it. And I think, as Emile pointed out, we know the current food system with increased urbanization, increased distance of consumers from where their food is being grown, increased consumption of highly processed foods. It's bad for their health, it's bad for the planet, and it's also bad for local economies. It leads to the concentration of a very few companies benefiting not only on the input side, but also on the retail side. And so an agroecological approach in an urban context really needs to take a different approach and find ways to have more local, regional production of agroecological foods that then gets into urban environments. And I don't think that's been done in Africa. Many of the same trends that are happening in other parts of the world are also happening in Africa. I gave the example of how it might be done with the exploratory study we did in Senegal. But I think I would look to, actually Brazil is probably where you see the most exciting activity in this area, where they've done public procurement of agroecological producers and then getting that into school systems and into public canteens, into other venues. And so, but also awareness raising to get people better connected to their food system. So it takes sort of multiple areas. It's not just one avenue.
Thank you very much. Questions? And raised? Not? Maybe. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I also have a question for Rachel, if I may. You said something in your presentation about agroecology markets. What are those? Are those really distinct from other markets? And is that useful? I mean, it raised many questions with me.
I have to stand. I just arrived today from the United States, so I don't want to fall asleep while I answer your question. Agroecological markets are markets that draw on the principles of agroecology. So they're building connections more directly between consumers and where the food is being produced. And they're using some of these principles. So providing decent livelihoods for the food producers, but also ensuring affordability for consumers. So I don't want to point to Brazil, but in some ways they've been at the forefront of some of this. Participatory guarantee systems where there's a more direct link between producers and consumers, ensuring that the foods are locally, culturally relevant, as well as healthy and diverse. So it's not just, if you will, organic, where we know, okay, they're using organic inputs. It's going beyond that to thinking about the whole food system, really a different kind of market, shorter supply chains, more attention to questions of justice, of livelihoods for the producers and the consumers, and thinking about culturally relevant foods and healthy foods.
Maybe throwing in another question, I think what was mentioned about the health burden and the cost to society, we are here talking about trillions of euros or dollars a year. And I think this is still considered as an externality to our food systems that needs to be addressed. The other thing, of course, is the climate crisis. And this leads me to say that we are moving step by step, but do we have the time to do it step by step? Do we not need to really accelerate the steps, at least, in order to meet the challenges? Because we don't have 20 years for the significant change that is needed. So what can we do to accelerate the transformation that we all need? So it's a question to all. Any other questions from the floor or from the participants, the distant participants?
There seemed to be a question on participatory guarantee services in Brazil. There was one before on agroecology, the stand of the Agroecology Coalition about biogenic and non-biogenic inputs. I'm sorry if I set aside this one. It might be a bit more specific to, maybe we should, I don't know. You want to say a word? Okay.
I can maybe say a participatory guarantee system. It's a system by which you certify through a peer-to-peer process among farmers, producers, but also in connection with the consumers, a relationship of trust and mutual checking that is not externally provided. In the case of organic food, you have an external certification which is costly and often not affordable for smallholder farmers. Here, it's really a peer-to-peer among producers in connection with the other members of the value chain to guarantee the quality of the product. The other question about the inputs, in agroecology, we are saying that we want to reduce or replace synthetic inputs. There is no minimum threshold. I think the situation is really vary from situation to situation, and we want to be as economical or as efficient as possible in the reduction of these inputs. And regarding breeding methodology, as I understand it, there is no part of the principles. Some of them are addressed more indirectly about equity, and the problem that we have with some of the GMOs, for example, is that the degree of control that the companies that are selling the GMOs have over the users of their products is more of the issue, and that is going against the principle of equity, of participation, etc. So it's not the technology per se, but rather the use of these technologies and the impact it has on farmers. Yes, there is a question there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question has to do with the member states that are part of the Agroecology Coalition. To what extent are you picking up elements around feasibility within especially some of the low middle income countries where a lot of the emphasis is more on producing more food and not necessarily worrying about how that food is actually produced? And I link this to the question that you asked earlier, because if we do not find ways on bringing agroecological principles into production processes at higher scales to address food security issues, then in spite of the benefits that we can get, it kind of slows the uptake somewhat. So I want to know the extent to which countries are voicing that or not at all, because it will affect the rate at which acceleration can actually take place.
Thank you. I'll try to answer that. I think quite a number of countries now have been developing agroecology strategies or agroecology policies in order to move towards the kind of transformation that we are talking about here. Unfortunately, that does not yet in most countries translate into a more complete transition towards those. That remains part of a policy among many others, and there are still very strong pushes by vested interest to keep the current system in place, that keep pushing for continuation of synthetic fertilizer subsidies, for example. And that, of course, the companies selling those fertilizers have a strong interest and do a lot of lobbying to maintain these kind of things in place. So also the funding sources coming from outside countries, development aid, loans, etc., are often still geared towards what I would say more conventional approaches and have not yet sufficiently transitioned towards agroecological production. But there is also still a disinformation about the belief that agroecological production systems are less productive than conventional, and all the results that we are seeing that have been published recently show the contrary, that it's equally or higher in productivity. And certainly from an income point of view, the study probably from the largest scale example of agroecology in India, where more than 1 million farmers are now practicing for a number of years agroecology, which they call natural farming, has shown an average of 11% higher productivity, an average of 50% higher net income, and in addition, 30% lower expenses on health, and 1/3 less of days of work because of illness. So it is really showing all the positive results from that. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question. It's more of a comment to support the agroecological approach. I believe that from a community perspective, given the community I work with, they have a lot of indigenous knowledge on, growing their crops, what used to happen before we had all these new methods come in. So if they are consulted, they'll feel more involved and their buy-in is going to be much, much better. And then when they see the results, it's not going to be something you have to try and convince them to get into. They'll see the results, they know what they were doing before, and they've been consulted. It'll definitely be a win for both parties. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, at the back. In the meantime, while walking there, Tristan is doing the job. I just want to comment on what just Emile said. Showcasing successful stories of transition is absolutely excellent. And no one would challenge and discuss what is currently happening in India. It's wonderful. Now, we have to be very realistic and face some realities. In Africa especially, there's a sort of a strong reluctance of governments into supporting agroecology. The word itself has not been adopted by certain very high institutions in Africa because it sort of bears a sort of sense of failure at the beginning, dangerous, risky for farmers. We have to face that reality. It exists. It's what feels, especially governments. And we have to realize that in the initial steps, it needs so much capacities by the farmers to learn new techniques, to combine many different things, labor, inputs, etc., replacing certain inputs by others, etc. That is not an easy thing. And there might be some losses at the beginning of the story. So this has to be factored in. So of course, these examples, the one that, for instance, Emile gave is absolutely fascinating and it leads the way. But you also have to be realistic in terms of policy making, in terms of supporting those governments, especially in Africa. Just to take one institution, FARA, they just remove the term agroecology from any of their official documents. It's the forum that coordinates agricultural research in Africa. So we have to be very aware that this is still a term and a stance and a move that is most probably, and it's been demonstrated, Rachel contributed and many others in the room have examples, but there's still a policy reluctance and caution about that. But that's something that we should also face and try to find solutions. Yes, sorry, I stole the mic.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Because also, you started to answer to my question, actually. So my question was about regarding the positive impact of agroecology. And from the farmer's perspective, what really prevents farmers from adopting the agroecology techniques? And is it related to the technique, or it is only the knowledge that they don't have, or what do we know about things that prevent them from adopting it? Thank you.
Take a couple more questions.
Yeah.
The lady there.
Maybe let's take another question, yeah, and then we'll try to cover that.
Thank you. Just to link your intervention, Sylvain, and the one with Emile about Andhra Pradesh example, my question is, do we know what kind of incentives or subsidies or policies allowed this transition to natural farming in Andhra Pradesh? So what made it a success there in India that will not be able, that we won't see in Africa because policies don't allow this kind of.
But that also kind of answers the gentleman's question in terms of, well, I will let Emile, who's probably more specialist than I am, but what I heard from Andhra Pradesh, we had some studies there, two things. First, very firm, strong policy support. And second, not mixing up different kinds of goods and services. I will get to that into my conclusion, actually. And we don't talk in Andhra Pradesh about biodiversity, human health, nutrition. They talk about income, getting out of poverty first. That to me would be, it works for Andhra Pradesh. I'm not saying it's a universal recipe, but you know, not mixing up many messages, many scales, many kind of goods and services, private, good, public, but just focusing on to getting people out of poverty. These people were already quite skilled farmers. This might be also a factor to consider.
I was very brief in my comments, but I think in between the lines, I mentioned also part of your answer. I think institutional buying can really help. It helps the health aspects, but it also helps the sourcing of the product. So it basically links production and consumption. Just wanted to add that.
Quite a few dimensions were mentioned there. In Andhra Pradesh, the government of Andhra Pradesh, the state government, has been, I won't even say supportive, has been allowing this to happen and has been willing to invest in it, but it's still investing only a small fraction of its agriculture budget. Even in Andhra Pradesh, I don't have a precise figure, but it's probably not more than 10% and probably less than that is invested. Still 90% is invested in conventional agriculture, including fertilizer subsidies. And what the argument that has been made is that the savings that the state is making on fertilizer subsidies, they have asked to invest half of that in an agroecological transformation, and the government has now agreed to that. So if they save, let's say, 1 million on not spending it on fertilizer subsidies, they agreed to give half of that to the initiative to mainstream agroecology, natural farming to other farmers. I still think that the lack of policy buy-in to a very large extent is influenced by vested interest. And this is an elephant in the room that is still not sufficiently put on the table. The lobbying that is the investment in lobbying by the industry to keep an industrial model of agriculture in place or to put it in place where it is not yet is not negligible. And I think that is a major factor that is slowing down. You mentioned FARA policy. Well, I don't know the current strategy, but one of the previous strategies of FARA was written by consultants coming from a country that I will not name, that was not very supportive of agroecology and wanted to favor their own industry influence in Africa. So I think, again, the influence that vested interests have, including on the research policies of bodies like FARA, is not negligible. And that is one of the major factors, in my view, that is slowing down the buy-in and the transition. So are there other, yeah, Rachel, do you want to maybe make comments also?
Yes, I just wanted to point to the importance of social, oh, that's gonna blow up on me, of social movements in all of these examples. So whether you're talking about Andhra Pradesh, whether you're talking about Brazil, or whether you're talking about Africa, because it is a struggle. And there are very strong vested interests from countries that are not interested, are opposed to agroecology, and who have industries in their countries that benefit from the industrial approach to agriculture and that benefit from a highly concentrated retail industry and that are pushing highly processed unhealthy foods on African consumers and consumers in other low-income areas. But there are moments of hope in Africa, and I don't want this forum people to walk away thinking that there aren't a lot of interesting and exciting initiatives happening in Africa around agroecology, including a number of governments that have been developing agroecology plans despite foreign funders and vested interests being opposed to that. And there is a lot of local knowledge about agroecological practices that draw on indigenous knowledge. So it's not as abysmal as we might walk away from some of the earlier interventions.
Well, you had quite a comprehensive answer to the question and to the reasons why agroecology was not easy to sort of foster. I may add that apart from these possible potential lobbyings or influences, the dismantlement of extension services, public extension services in many countries doesn't help. It's sort of in the worst cases, a sort of a privatization of extension or advice to farmers, which is not helping. There was a question on the back here. Who was raising the hand? Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. My name is Nicole Metz. I talked also in the earlier session. Maybe also for an optimistic view, I would have a question for you, the lead of the Agroecology Coalition. I realize there are lots of interests, there are lots of interest everywhere, but your coalition could be a force in itself to influence certain processes worldwide. So I would like to know what you see as the power of this Agroecology Coalition. And maybe a second question is related to a discussion which is expected tomorrow. There will be discussion on the role of the private sector in nutrition, knowing that every dollar invested in nutrition would generate $23 in return. Would the nutrition argument be an argument that you can use based on the research we heard to also convince certain others to embrace some of the principles of agroecology?
I'm running. Who answers that?
Yeah, the question to the coalition, I'll try to answer. Before I answer your question, we mentioned extension services that are not existing anymore. Many farmers, the only advice they get is from the suppliers, the people that sell the inputs, selling fertilizers, pesticides, etc. And so they are being told, you know, what to do. And this is one major obstacle, is that there is no independent advice anymore. And even the formal extension services where they still exist, people have been trained in a model of agricultural productivity geared technologies that conventional or industrial agriculture. When my own education was very much in the model of an industrial model of agriculture. I had courses about how to balance synthetic fertilizers and courses on synthetic pesticides, etc. I didn't have a course on agroecology at all. So the people that have been trained in these more conventional approaches are also not in a position now they have to be retrained, and investment should be made in that. What the coalition is doing, I hope then the coalition will be an important actor in accelerating, bringing together the governments and other types of organizations on practical questions The coalition works through 6 working groups on policy, on financing and investment, on research, on markets, on communication, and on practical examples of implementation on the ground and lessons learned from different experiences and exchanges. But also in the policy framework, there's been a presence in the different COPs, in the Committee on World Food Security, and other regional policy setting fora, in order to work with, especially with the government representatives, because at the end of the day, civil societies can have a voice in international fora, but the decisions are still made by member states. So we have been mobilizing, just to give one concrete example, at the COP15 in Montreal, where the Global Biodiversity Framework was being discussed. We have been asking a number of countries, member of the coalition, where our contact points are often from the Ministry of Agriculture in most countries, although not all. We have from Ministries of Environment and Ministries of Health that are the focal point for the coalition in Ghana, for example. It's the Ministry of Health that is the focal point for Ghana in the coalition. We've been asking them to contact their counterparts in the Ministry of Environment, in most cases, that are participating in the convention, COP, to support the inclusion of agroecology as an important approach in the framework of Target 10 on sustainable use in production systems. And that has been successful because, we can say that agroecology has been included as a result of this effort that was made by the coalition to get the text in, because there was quite fierce opposition from a number of countries to include that. So I think this is one way also where the coalition can help moving us forward. We'll have one there and then.
Putting on my African hat. Agroecological principles are not foreign to African thinking, in that, if anything, we're probably closest to the most recent use of agroecology as a way of growing food. There is also a lot of thinking currently where people are beginning to think about health and misuse of pesticides and the like. It has become quite heightened since the COVID pandemic. And then we do have, I always say we should never think of Africa as a single entity, because there are 54 countries on that continent. Some of those countries do have agroecology strategies and speak positively about agroecology, but they struggle on how they're gonna balance that with all the needs to produce more food. So the Agroecological Coalition, in my view, has got a big job in creating stronger awareness, building on existing African knowledge about producing food that are positive towards agroecology. I've been around the table discussing the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. And when the terms agroecology came up, some people welcomed it, other people went ballistic. So there's a diversity of perceptions across the board. In terms of training, remember, we've been adopting the same training that you have received of what agriculture is supposed to be. And so we've been shading whatever would have been called agroecology from our production practices. But there's also a lot of interest in agroecological principles. And so the challenge that I really want to give the agroecological coalition is to engage extensively with those African governments that are already positive about it. An institution like FARA is a member state institution. And so amongst some of the member states of FARA are actually those with agroecology friendliness, if you will. So that's an entry point. Second is that when you think in terms of academic institutions, I think engaging with academic institutions on the African continent is also important. We need to begin to look at pluralistic ways of producing food, including agroecology as an option. And through that, you can have some headways through training.
Yes, thank you, Namokolo. In fact, what I wanted to say really makes use of what you just said, and thank you for being so eloquent about it. After the UN Food System Summit in 2021, quite a few coalitions were built, including the agroecology one. And I think what is important to do now is that these coalitions, including the agroecology one, really seek to support these national food system pathways, transformation pathways that were also established at the time or developed at the time. I feel that sometimes these two, the national processes and the and the coalitions that are basically at global level are somehow disconnected. So what I say is really in support of what Namokolo just said. And I believe that one of the other coalitions, the one on healthy diet from sustainable food systems, has a lot of similarities. And what they do in addition, at least what they did last year, I lost a bit of contact, is that they have a special working group on bringing the thinking of healthy diets from sustainable food systems to the country pathways, and learning from each other how to support the national pathways transformation into pathways that are food systems that are a little bit more sustainable and a little bit more better for nutrition. So maybe the agroecology coalition and the healthy diet coalition can also closely work together to find each other at country level support. Thank you. And maybe on the nutrition question, if I may, very quickly, the 1 to 23 return on investment is of course a very strong argument. And for that one to be valid, we really need the ministers of finance in the room that are very often absent in discussions like these. But I think we all of us will have to make an effort to include the financial people into this discussion.
Thank you. I think we are going to the final legs of the session. Thank you very much to the panelists, their insights. Thanks for the audiences. I'll try to wrap up quickly the few sort of light bulb ideas that I had, or lessons or things that came to my mind while I was listening to this. Before I start, I want to just refer to what is on the chat. Bruno Dorin has again posted another sort of small paragraph of discussion. He's been one of the researchers at CIRAD, very active in Andhra Pradesh at that time, but now is also busy with referring to what you were saying about African countries being very willing to engage with DTIS in Senegal, for instance. Bruno has been very willing to well, more than willing, he's been actually active into these activities. So he's put some links and elements on the chat. Now, to wrap up, we are the 9th year of the decade of action on nutrition. So we are near the end. The 2021 Tokyo Nutrition for Growth Summit was more sort of a large diagnosis forum. And now what we heard this session, what we heard in the previous session was, when do we get into action? Action meaning policy making. What kind of instruments should be put in place to make things move, to make things change? So I would just sort of focus onto these ideas, not to repeat the very interesting things that were said during this session, but to try to draw some ideas or lessons from that. Again, but this diagnosis dimension is very important. And since the beginning of this decade, I think the scientific community has done a lot of efforts and we achieved many things. 10 years ago, we never spoke about the true cost of food. Now we have quantified it. It's still going on, but there's a lot that have been done here. I think that we have exposed more and more accurately the damages, social and environmental damages of unsustainable food supply chains, for instance, with the proper tools. We have demonstrated the benefits of agroecology onto the natural environment, but also, as Rachel illustrated just before, onto social aspect and nutrition. So these are just examples of the big effort that researchers have made during the recent years. But again, this is proper diagnosis. Again, what do we do now in terms of action, drafting action? So we're still a bit lagging behind the full comprehension of this wealth of evidence. That's what I understood, what we said. I understood also from this session and a bit also from the previous one that the time has come not to make research only generator of knowledge, not even a broker of knowledge, but also a facilitator of these science policy interface. How can we interact more in established platforms with policymakers, having the times and space organized to make this information, this evidence, these facts, these results meaningful so that policies are drafted properly. So in terms of the lessons, I have actually 3. It's going to be quick. The first thing I understood and learned from the discussions, and it never was mentioned this way, but I insist maybe it should be because it's a way to get away from the realm of values. From the previous session, a bit in this one, we talked about solidarity, taking care of the vulnerable, etc. Fine, we are in the regime of values. What do we do, researchers, with that? I think we have a framework that could be useful. It's the one of private goods, common goods, public goods. And I think that is a useful one to draft policies. Let me explain myself here. We have been talking today about continuum between production, agroecology, for instance, based, and nutrition, the far end of the spectrum, and in between a set of segments and subsectors. All of those provide many different goods, services, and even disservices. Some are public, some are common, some are private. At the 2 extremes of the spectrum, production and, we heard that a lot today, we talked about Andhra Pradesh, etc. From production to nutrition, what is praised is mostly the public goods that they provide. Nutrition, public health, and on production, protection of biodiversity, resources, soil, etc., etc. Fine, there are also some more private or common goods involved. But in between, and we touched that talking about companies, there's a number of segments in the whole food system that are a bit less concerned with common and public goods and very much more interested with the private goods growing. So this has to be considered because my point is to say policy instruments, legal, regulatory, financial, fiscal, economic, capacity development oriented are very different depending on what do you target, what do you favor, the promotion of public, common, or private goods. So to help policymakers to design better their activities, we have us researchers to be a bit clearer. When we mix up, when the analysis of a transitioning farmer, for instance, moving towards agroecology. And we say the guy has to feed his own family, so increasing its revenue, private good. He has to mitigate climate change, benefit for all humanity, public good. He has to, he can also contribute to preserving the community's natural resources and biodiversity. This is more sort of a common good, etc., etc. There's a number of objectives that can be attached to someone, an household transitioning towards a new system. That's a lot, and it's different policy instruments, or maybe just a few, but choices have to be made. The farmer will not make the choice. So if we want to rise or increase private goods, the revenue in the pocket of the farmer. It's a different story than to tell him, well, thank you for doing that because you're protecting some resources for the whole community, or you're providing healthy food to your neighbors, etc., etc. It's a different objective. So we have to be very clear about those different objectives and not mix up nutrition and then revenue, and then it's all important probably, but it's about policy, it's about also communities' perception of what is their real need and what they want to push first. And that was maybe to answer again the question by the gentleman on the back. One of the key success in Andhra Pradesh, they were focusing one objective first, revenue of the farmers, get them out of poverty, and not mixing up. Probably there were many, many other benefits, but this was not mixed up in terms of policy. The second lesson I want to draw from this is the one of, and we learned a lot from Gabriela contribution. I think we had this complementarity between Rachel and Gabriela's contributions, but I think it's not, it might be necessary to reinsist that most of us, most policymakers, focus a lot onto the supply side analysis of things. Because we are going to produce more healthy food, some sort of a magical trickling system or whatever, if not analyzed, of course, which analysis Rachel did, for instance, but also many other researchers. Well, by this sort of magic wand or miracle, then nutrition will be better. Not that straight. And Rachel gave the example that it needs some conditions and it happens because of this, because of that. My point here is to say we have to look at food systems also from a demand issue side, from a demand side. If people do not purchase healthy food, it's not because they don't like it. It's not just because they cannot afford it. So purchasing power of consumers is one of the key. So we can turn the thing in many directions. That, of course, does not disqualify anything on the supply side, but policymakers should also have a look at the demand side. What is the purchasing power of those people? That was one of the boxes that Gabriela showed us among the systems she described in terms of the food system hindrances. A third and last comment I would have is that what I heard today, this afternoon, and again, not mentioned as explicit as that's why I want to put it forth. Scale matters. Where do we work? The global orientations, this very summit that is going to start, United Nations orientation, etc., are very important. They are compasses, as I like to call them. They give us the overall direction. Of course, national authorities are key. They are the metronomes of what happens in terms of policy making, but what happens in the ground, and that was very much exemplified by Angela and some others. What happens in the ground is so important. Fabrice de Klerk in the other session said when he gets to the ground, he's swimming among solutions. There's a lot of solutions. Use this expression. I'm swimming in the middle of solutions. There are many solutions. So things are actually happening in the ground, locally, at territory level. How do we make sense? How do we navigate through this multitude of solutions, that initiatives that happen on the ground, and to make them being absorbed, this scaling up? I hear that every day now on the commissions, on INPA's corridors. Key motto is scale up, trying to benefit from all the successes. So how do we do that? I think that it all starts by the territorial and local levels. And this comes back to the previous point I made. Common goods are so important. In agroecology, it's of course an individual adventure, sort of. The farmer has to make his decisions or her decisions, but it's also a collective action depending adventure, in the sense that nurseries, land and soil management activities, but also in terms of nutrition, all these school food procurement, local systems, the solidarity system put in place in villages, all this is collective action. These are commons. They are not private goods. They are not public goods. They are something in between, a third sort of pathway to a governance towards change, and that is probably not enough supported by policies. How do we support these collective but yet local actions that are so important to transiting towards agroecological practices and then improve the nutrition? I will stop there with these, and maybe Emile, you want to add on something?
Just one short comment. I think I also want to end up on a positive note. We've heard, and especially in the last 2 years, the number of countries that have been developing strategies, policies on an agroecological transformation has been quite impressive. And that's just in the last 2 years. The other thing, of course, if we want to move on to action and see a difference on the ground, that will require investments. And there we are seeing a change also by a willingness of different types of funding mechanisms willing to work together to increase the efficiency of their investments. And there I want to just give an example of what the coalition has done in terms of financing and investment. We brought together in October 2023, 70 donors and investors from development banks, bilateral donors, multilateral donors, philanthropic donors, private investors, to discuss how they could, by working together, coordinating their investments, they can be more efficient. And this has led to a follow-up meeting in June in Tanzania, looking at how to implement the Tanzania agroecology strategy that was just adopted by the government, how the different actors can come together to support the implementation of this strategy and be more efficient than just one agency doing one thing in one county and another one doing a small thing elsewhere, by exchanging, etc. And this is something that the coalition will be facilitating also in the future. So we are also tracking investments in agroecology, and a tool has been developed to do that. And I think we are seeing increasing investments. It's still small, far too small, but we are on the right trend. So with that, I'd like to thank all the speakers and panelists for their interventions, and also the audience, both online and in the room here, for their participation.
It's gone. No, it's back. We have what do you call it? A cocktail. A cocktail. That's a good news. Yeah. Cocktail. I'm not even sure where it's gonna be organized. Probably the next room there. Yeah. Okay. Cocktail. Here we go. Thank you.